Hello, so this is the start of the AS circulatory system, and in this first part we're going to look at the circulatory system, so the main blood vessels going around the body and also the heart and its main structures that you need to know. Now up first, you should know most of these blood vessels from GCSE, so what I want you to do is try and pause it here and see if you can remember the names of these different blood vessels and just scribble them down onto a piece of paper. So the first one then we've got is the aorta, and then the next one is an artery which carries blood to the brain, and that's the carotid artery. Then after that we have got the hepatic artery which carries blood to the liver. Then we've got the mesenteric artery, and then we've got the renal artery which carries blood to the kidneys. Then coming out of the kidneys we've got the renal vein. Then we've got the vena cava, which is where all the major veins coming out of organs join onto and go back to the heart. We've also got this little vessel here, which is the hepatic portal vein, which carries blood, which will have a lot of the products of digestion in it, from the small intestine up into the liver. Then from the liver, the vessel coming out is the hepatic vein, which joins up again with the vena cava. And then we've got the jugular vein, which comes out of the brain and carries blood back to the vena cava, which eventually goes back into the heart. We've then got a little blood vessel coming out from the heart, which is the pulmonary artery, which carries deoxygenated blood here, and then we've got the pulmonary vein, which comes back into the heart. Now, to be fair, some of these are new from GCSE, so there's a few here which you might not have looked at, but in general, things that we can see here is that most of the arteries will contain oxygenated blood, with the exception of the pulmonary artery, whose job it is to take blood to the lungs so that it can become oxygenated. As well as that, most of the veins here will contain deoxygenated blood, with the exception of the pulmonary vein, which has just received oxygenated blood from the lungs and has taken it back to the heart. I suppose another thing to point out here is that in most of the cases, whenever you've got a vessel going into or out of an organ, so for example, the liver here has the hepatic artery going in and the hepatic vein leaving. The kidneys have the renal artery going in and the renal vein leaving, whereas the brain has the carotid artery going in and the jugular vein coming out of the brain. Now, this little diagram pretty much shows the same thing, so it's really important that you learn each of these blood vessels and learn their names and where they carry blood to and from. As I say, most of the arteries carry blood into the organ. So for example, pulmonary artery carries it into the lungs, hepatic artery carries it in the liver, mesenteric carries it into the small intestine, and the veins usually carry it out of the organs and back towards the heart. The only other thing to have a look at here is the inferior and superior vena cava. So if you imagine that here's a little person, I don't know what's going on with that leg, and there's their little heart. The vena cava is going to come back into the right atrium, but you actually have a part above the heart. So if you imagine a line across there, that's the superior vena cava, which brings blood back from the head and the arms, and then the inferior vena cava brings blood back from the rest of the organs and the legs. Now, we also say that the mammalian circulation is a double circulation, and the reason for this is because it must go through the heart twice to complete one circulation of the body. So if you look at this diagram here, here's your heart. So imagine we're a little red blood vessel starting there. So for us to get around the body, once, we actually have to go through the heart twice. So it starts in the heart and it goes out to the rest of the body. And this is actually known as the systemic circulation. So the blood leaves in the systemic circulation, goes to the rest of the body, and then it comes back to the heart for the second time, and then it travels to the lungs in the pulmonary circulation, and then it comes back to the heart. So for us to get around the body once, it has to go through the heart twice, and that's why it's known as a double circulation. Now, as we say, it travels in two circuits, the pulmonary circulation, which is through the lungs, and the systemic circulation, which is through the rest of the body. So we're going to look at those in a bit more detail now. Now, here we've got a little diagram of the heart, and here is the septum. So if we just draw a line up through that, that splits the heart into the left-hand side and the right-hand side. Now, remember, when you're looking at the heart, the left-hand side and the right-hand side are opposite because it's as if you're looking at somebody else's heart. So what is your right-hand side is actually the left-hand side of the heart as you're looking down on it. And what's your left-hand side is the right-hand side of the heart as you're looking down on it. So here we have the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, and the left ventricle. Now, as I said, we've got two circulations, the pulmonary and the systemic circulation. So if we look firstly at the pulmonary circulation, which is from the right-hand side of the heart, it pumps blood at a lower pressure, and this is a fairly standard GCSE point. It pumps blood at a lower pressure because it doesn't have to go as far. So the right-hand side of the heart is only pumping it a short distance. So because it's only going a short distance, it creates this lower pressure. But as well as that, and this is a new bit of information at AS, because it's going at a lower pressure to the lungs, it allows more time for gas exchange to take place. So if you imagine the whole point of pumping blood to the lungs is so that the blood can pick up as much oxygen as possible. So by pumping blood at a lower pressure into the lungs, it means that the blood spends slightly longer in the lungs and allows it more time to pick up as much oxygen as possible, and also enough time so that I can get rid of the carbon dioxide which is in the blood. So by pumping the blood at a low pressure into the lungs, it allows more time for gas exchange, and because it's only pumping at a short distance, a higher pressure isn't necessary. Now next up is the systemic circulation. Now this is from the left-hand side of the heart, and at GCSE we always said how it pumps blood at a higher pressure because it's going to the rest of the body, which is a further distance. But now there's actually these two new points as well. It needs to pump them at a higher pressure so that it can get blood to the tissues to deliver metabolites and remove waste products quickly. Now, metabolites are things that the cells are going to need to carry out its general reactions, like for example producing proteins or producing hormones or producing enzymes. So by having this high pressure and having the blood pumped under high pressure, it means that these metabolites can get delivered to the cells really quickly so that they don't have to stop synthesizing proteins or anything like that. As well as that, it's really important to maintain the blood or tissue fluid balance. Now, what that means is when blood gets pumped to organs, some of the fluid which is in the blood as plasma has to leave the blood and form tissue fluid. And when it forms a tissue fluid, that's how different substances get delivered to the cells. Now, because your heart is driving this change, your heart has to pump the blood at a high enough pressure so that the fluid can first of all leave the blood, form the tissue fluid, but then there also needs to be enough pressure to force that tissue fluid back into the blood so it can go back into your circulation and get rid of your waste products. Now, what actually happens to people with heart failure? So let's say, for example, they've had a heart attack, or maybe there is a blockage in part of the ventricle and their heart's not pumping properly, or maybe even they've got a leaky valve. What can happen is blood will get pumped to their organs, and let's say, for example, their hands or their feet or something. And then because their heart isn't pumping under enough pressure, the tissue fluid can leave the blood, but it can't get back in. So people with heart failure will often have really swollen feet. And that's simply because their heart can't produce a high enough pressure to force the tissue fluid back into the blood. So the two circulations that we've got then are the pulmonary circulation from the right hand side of the heart, and it pumps blood at a lower pressure to allow more time for gas exchange, and because it's only going a short distance. The systemic circulation comes from the left hand side of the heart. It produces a higher blood pressure so that it can deliver metabolites and remove waste to the rest of the body, and also maintain the blood tissue fluid balance in each organ. Now, that's the first part of this topic covered. The next thing is we're going to have a look at the heart and all the different structures. Now, if you haven't done so, I'd recommend that you have a little look at the GCSE videos just so that you can get up to date with what you need to know before we go on and look at some more complicated structures. Goodbye.